Next to the speakers, we'll have Andreas Mellon joining us from IKEA. Kind of the theme that we had during this presentation is what are the benefits for a cross-border merchant to work with a single acquirer, maybe a single cross-border acquirer in multiple markets in Europe. So what are actually the challenges for such a proposition? If you really want to have consistent, cost-efficient solution across Europe, what's kind of the vision that you want to realize, and what are some of the challenges that associate with that? And maybe the best person to start with then Andreas, to say, okay, Andreas, maybe in a couple of minutes, what is your vision in terms of an acquiring solution in Europe, and what are the challenges you're facing in practice to realize that?
Well, thank you for having me here. The vision is relatively clear. We would like to cover Europe with 2, maximum 3 acquirers, cover all the payment means, point of sale as well as online. Matter of fact is we've done an acquiring tender, a pan-European one, in second half of 2017. Background is that we have more acquirers than countries for some good reasons and some less good reasons. And this acquiring consolidation is also to be seen in combination with our attempt to get one payment service provider for the point of sale, which still represents 96-97% of our revenues. Of course, decreasing over the time, but still 96% is coming through this on this channel, this point of sale channel. So we have too many decentralized solutions. Now we made a tender for PSP, and then we thought it's a good idea to take the opportunity when we roll out a new payment service provider, also to streamline a little bit our scattered acquiring landscape. The outcome is that we now have 3 main acquirers for about 12 to 14 countries. Why it's 12 to 14? Because we still are in negotiations with 2 more countries. Why it's not covering all of Europe? Well, as you most probably know, we have things like local debit, like Germany, country we are in here, representing more than 10% of our entire revenue. So this is something we have to consider. Then you have local debit in Denmark, which for legal reasons you cannot bypass. Norway, Switzerland, Belgium, Portugal, Italy, which you can find a workaround. And then you have countries like the Netherlands, where you have bilateral agreements which are actually protecting the acquiring market. So it's impossible for a cross-border acquirer to give you a financial sustainable offer for debit acquiring in the Netherlands. So all this leads to a quite scattered landscape. Nevertheless, we managed to get a few countries under one umbrella. Interchange++, we were always lobbying for it for the last 9 years, at least me in person, and before that some of my colleagues. Gives us now a little bit more insight about the pricing and where the money gets, because we are a true paying member of the payment industry with more than 180 million euros in fees that we pay on a yearly basis. And we see fees like, and we heard it already today, like market development fees for markets that are, I would say, pretty developed. When you think about innovation fee for NFC, and we have 95% of all transactions coming from NFC, then I'm just wondering what the heck are we then developing and financing. And I'm also in constant discussions with the schemes, because during this tender, what we realized, it is very, very tough for cross-border acquirers to actually compete with local acquirers in quite some countries. And I think it's pretty unfair, because they do a lot of investment, and then the local acquirers are actually, to some extent, even bypassing the schemes, which I don't understand the business case for the schemes here, because what is the interest of the scheme? It's getting actually the information. It's not so much the payment stream. This is done by the acquirer, by the issuer. It's not the financial term, it's the information. And the very moment you're bypassed, you don't get any kind of information. So if there is anyone from the schemes, I'm lobbying for this since many years. I still don't get it, why it's not possible for those to do true cross-border acquiring, that we have one fee, at least on a European level. Under the precondition of direct connect, I'm fine with that, so that you make sure you get 100% of the information and we get 100% of the service. Otherwise, we will still face this scattered landscape, I would say, for the coming years, because some acquirers, some countries are simply pricing out the competitors, and it's very non-competitive, I would say. So you see this in Southern Europe. And the last remark I would say, before I sound here like the lawyer of the acquirers, during this tender it was also quite stunning to see how few acquirers you can find on the market that are capable to do interchange plus plus. And not meaning the ones that they're playing around with really true interchange plus plus, because we had now the opportunity to compare the offers. And I would say it's a number that you can count on one hand at the moment. So there is a lot to be done from an industry perspective as well.
Thank you, Andreas. It would be great to have the other panelists from their perspectives maybe comment on this. So, Roger, maybe start with you. So you run into these kind of issues as well in offering from the other side, from provider perspective. So what's your response to Andreas' observations? Would you change?
As your acquirer, that's the idea behind. No, to be honest, I see your points, and it's really hard to fight against or being an acquirer in some countries. You have speaking about Netherlands, for example, France as well. There are some, how can I say it, some burden to go in such markets as a cross-border acquirer. It's very hard to do it, and if you remember the presentation I made before, and we tried a lot to do to be an acquirer in all these countries, and we were very successful, but to be very honest, not in every country. Because often when issuer are also acquirers, then we lose every time because of pricing issues, because you have another dynamic in the market if an issuer is also an acquirer, for especially in the CE markets, it's often the case. And for me as a Swiss guy, often looking to the EU, I dream that really the EU is willing to go forward with the term harmonization. Because when I compare Germany with France, for example, it's a total different story. And for us in the cross-border acquiring business, it would be very helpful that we have at the end really a standardized infrastructure, for example, in Europe.
Gijsbert, can you also comment on this, and maybe from your perspective, if you would be in charge of European payments, what would you actually change?
That's a good question. Look, I would probably first of all confirm what the other two speakers have just mentioned, which is probably not good for a debate because it seems we're pretty much on the same position here. So to come back, what I think would indeed be a huge improvement if we could see from the card schemes, just to go back again to card scheme fees, because we're talking here about acquiring cards, right? Visa, MasterCard cards. So the rules they set, they're really fundamental to how this business is functioning and whether this is solid and sound or not. And I think it's their responsibility to create what I would call a level playing field. And we are pretty far away from that in a number of markets, certainly in our region, and what I'm hearing also from other Western European markets. But it's really, I think, unhealthy. It's not good for anybody, also not for the schemes. I think Andreas Mellon just made a good point. It would also be good for the card schemes to get full visibility and process all these transactions. The other thing which maybe I would like to add here is that it's not just a distortion of local acquiring versus cross-border acquiring. I mean, if you're a local acquirer and you happen not to be the biggest issuer in the market, you also have a problem, right? So I'm also sitting here representing a local acquiring business for RBI Group. We also have issues on a local level. So I think it would be very healthy for the local and the cross-border acquiring businesses to have card schemes take the responsibility and create, with their rules, with their fee structures, a level playing field, which helps the industry to kind of move on. Yeah, then we can compete on things that matter and bring real value to merchants, rather than trying to see who can cut short the rules on a local level or not.
Okay, thank you. Maybe Sebastian, from the technology perspective, you know, the payment space is getting so increasingly complex. So it's card payments. There are a number of new payment methods coming to the market as well. We got P2P payments. Of course, we have PC2 coming up. If all the local payment schemes. So how do you manage that? How do you help acquirers to work really cross-border?
So on our side, we work on both sides, on the acquiring side and on the acquirer side and on the retailer side. And everything that we said today about the language, about the interchange plus, about the complexity of different protocols, then this is what we need to bring on our platform. We need to bring the agility and the convenience for our customers to be able to handle different cases. And when we see a group like IKEA, that is, I think, one of the largest retailers in Europe that is still having, at least from what I understood, 3 acquirers and maybe up to 5 acquirers. We see that having one global acquirer for Europe will not happen tomorrow for, I would say, most of the retailers on the market. So they will see a huge need for retailers to be able to connect to multiple acquirers on different markets. And this is where I believe standardization can bring, let's say, a solution to that, and that's why as HPS we decided to go for Nexo, because we believe that could be one way. This being said, today we are still facing this ISO 8583 common, standard, customized everywhere. And today we have no guarantee that the same will not apply with ISO 20022. And that's clearly a risk that we have in front of us. And we were discussing recent, so we see from the retail perspective that the retailers are pushing for this, at least Nexo protocol, because there is a clear interest for them to have, let's say, one protocol to address multiple acquirers. But we were discussing recently with one of our customers on the acquiring side, and they are not ready, I mean, to be Nexo, to move to Nexo. They were basically asking us kind of question about why did we move to Nexo? What is our vision for Nexo, and basically what is the value prop? So I think there is a push on one end for standardizations for the retail side, but I'm not sure this is the same case on the other side, on the acquiring business, because they maybe needs more to deal with their local constraint, but they don't, that's not, at least from our perspective, we didn't see the same match on the other side.
Maybe also from the FIS perspective, could you comment on this?
Yeah, sure. I think what he says, I truly agree with that, but looking at all the certification costs that the brands impose on the different combinations you have to certify from an acquiring point of view with all the terminals you support. For every brand, for every combination, you have to do the brand services or the terminal type approval. Going back to your point on the schemes, if they want to earn money on that, I think by consolidating that and by making sure that we can convince the brands that one certification with one acquirer can do for all the countries may remove a lot of cost on that level. Because right now, if you want to support with a terminal a certain credit card in country X, probably you have to do the certification because the protocol is different. Giving pushback to the schemes, and I don't want to step on the toes of the schemes here, but that's definitely where acquirers can see a benefit because it will remove a lot of the certification costs they have to do there. Yeah. So if that can be a means to convince them why choose Nexo, that's definitely one item to think about.
Thank you. By the way, in the audience, please use your app or just grab the good old microphone to ask the questions to the panel if you want. Maybe from a standards perspective, Norma, how would standards help here? Or are we going to end up with ISO 20 or 22 flavors like we have with 8583? How would you prevent? Can standards really help us here?
It's a Sebastian's point. I think Nexo is as I said, is a collaborative initiative. And the only way that we could prevent that is that as we could have as many as possible of each of the categories that will be involved in making sure that we stick to those ISO protocols and we don't deviate and do stuff. And that's the only way. Because otherwise, we are not mandating anything. We are there to build those protocols and making sure that they do address the market needs. And by hearing IKEA and having a retailer like IKEA being part of it will be a plus for us for sure. Because they have needs and maybe they incorporating those needs into evolution of those protocols will then make sure that we will prevent potentially those developing and customizing those standards. But honestly, there's nothing that we can prevent. As a specification provider, we're trying to make sure that we have as many of the ecosystem players that are collaborating with us. But I could understand on the other end, because we had, from a Desjardins point of view, we had the same question. Why should I develop something that is fully standards that anyone could plug and play? What is my business model going to be? Anyone will be able to answer the merchant needs. And that's what we decide. Yes, that's why we should be building this as an acquirer. This is what we should be doing as a PSP. I should please my customer needs and making sure that he will be free to use anyone that is bringing values that he's looking for. And I think that's what the standards and having the ecosystem working on them is kind of bringing to the market as of today.
Excellent. Questions from the audience? Over there.
The nexo specifications you mentioned, are they only in XML?
Yes and no. Basically, most of them are XML based, but we are looking at JSON as another way of using them, and also becoming more involved with W3C and other initiatives around standardization in that area as well.
Thank you. I have one more question, if that's... Oh. Sorry, just for the acquiring, cross-border acquiring. To clarify, you're saying that although it's possible, it's still not quite as smooth as you'd like it. Is that the end message here? Or have you achieved, or we're near achieving the cross-border acquiring?
Yes, take that.
Anyone who can.
Anyone? Maybe we ask Andreas and then Gijsbrecht.
Well, we achieved it for 12 to 14 countries in Europe.
So,
and I know some of our members are sorry.
If I may add to it, I think that kind of like answers it. But so the point is, I think technically you can provide cross-border acquiring, and probably almost across all countries in Europe. But at some point, the economic value is not there, because you are providing a solution which either doesn't cover the relevant payment methods to the extent it hurts the retailer, or you are confronted with those scheme fees we were talking about that are of such a level that it's just not economically feasible, or the retailer would rather stick with the local solution than move to a centralized solution. So it's not outweighing the benefit of simplifying and then centralizing the model. So I hope that answers the question.
Question there at the back.
Hi. Question about standard making or handling. Being in charge of some standards domestically myself, I find myself battling with some disruptive forces, you might call them, as they usually prefer to bypass the standard or even the card schemes altogether, or the local acquirers altogether, instead of joining forces and working together. This is simply because sometimes it's, from their perspective, it's much simpler. It's a simpler project with less partners, and they want to have time to market, which is very, very stiff. And so we sometimes find ourselves chasing them in order to get the corporation, which is very hard. I wanted to hear your take on this. And maybe to spice things up a bit, I wanted to know how usually you handle the fact that some of the partners of those disruptors are actually your members, and they're trying to compete with each other based on these new and innovative things.
As I said earlier, I think you need to look at it from a cooperative point of view or co-petition point of view. For sure, some are keeping that as an asset to defend from others, applying standards may sometimes be viewed as, okay, will people still be using our networks to do stuff? What sometimes they tend to forget is that, let's say if you're on the issuing side, there's thousands or millions of people that carry your brand that travel internationally, and when they're due, they need to go to the other brand to have their card accept. So somehow you're kind of losing money on that side. So, but is that easy? No. As I said, is a collaborative approach, and one need to understand the strategic point of view or the business point of view. If you look, just looking at it from an IT point of view, that maybe make no sense. But if you're looking at it more from a business or a strategic point of view, you could then provide other services that you never thought you were able to do and expand.
Thanks.
Any more questions? I thought there was a question in the back. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question related to the nexo protocols and standards. The first question: how will the how will everyone stick to the same format? As I understood, this is the certification centers will guarantee that everyone will be using the same format. On the contrary, let's say to ISO 8583, and we are talking about the same specification, which will not change with every system of every provider. This is one question, and the second question: nexo, as I understood, a non-for-profit organization, and protocol. This is something that has to develop. You cannot stop it at some point and tell we are ready, done. It has to continue. And how this. How can you guarantee that this non-for-profit organization will live in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years?
Okay, I'll let you answer the first part. And
yes,
I'll take
you
the
can
second.
take the second one. Yeah. So on the first one, how do you guarantee that everybody is conform and that this is it? Different to the ISO 8583, and also the reason why EPAS had to reinvent itself and becoming nexo at a certain point in time is because EPAS was already ISO 20022 and they were very standard on message formats, but what we were missing was kind of an application definition, and that was where the MEG or the message user guides came in, where there was a real explanation like you would take in any country an ISO 8583, but really go to the detail on how each field value would be used. Nexo goes to that level, so it's kind of an elaborated ISO 8583, but in a generic way. The reason why it works for many of the members which are in there is because everybody has a word to say in there. So there's 40+ members in Europe, and also me speaking for FIS, which is a global company and not only looking at Europe, where it works, yeah, and it has been looked at. It's not just something we invented a few years ago, but it goes back from more than 10 years now, I think, where everybody has words to say on this is what this field value should look like, these are the value sets we need, so it's an elaborated standard. And yes, there will be flavors to it, but the specifications or the test cases have a value. So there's test scenarios who do cover for the business scenarios, where people see need and fit for real in-the-field scenarios. So the test cases are not just a technology invention, but it's real business value-based scenarios. So it should be useful as it is right now. Yeah, and obviously, looking at the collaborative aspect to it, if there's pieces missing, we'll try to guarantee the backwards compatibility in that.
And how could we guarantee that Nexo will still be there in 10 years? The only way we could do that is by having our existing members, but also new members, getting involved. So if you feel that the mission that we're on serve your purpose, please join Nexo. It's really cheap to be a member, but also you have, as Marie just said, you have the ability of kind of building the future, but making sure that we are answering our needs, because as members we express ourselves and we say what we're looking and what we need to do, and that's the only way. People need to be involved, and people need to make sure that we are doing the better goods and building that road to the to payment acceptance and even more, using a standardized way of using. So ISO is there for many years, and we're building on that methodology, the system, the way. And as Marie said, we are making sure that we're providing guidance as much as possible, so that because we had that burden of using that standard modified 85, 83 protocols, so we want to make sure that we're not replicating, hopefully, the same mistake.
Okay, we are at time. I think what we hear here is that cross-border acquiring still has its challenges. Apparently, the playing field is not completely level, so we all have to play a little bit more creatively to provide the service to the market. The standardization is not completely there yet, but work is being done, and I think some positive messages. We have a large merchant here on the panel, especially realized this in 14 countries, I think you said. Two providers in the acquiring space that have a cross-border offering in the market and say, okay, we can do this both in a multi-local and also a cross-country environment. And the technology is getting there too. And I also sense a lot of interest in the nexo standards from the questions that we got from the audience. So on a positive note, it's going in the right direction. I think a lot of work to be done, but we're getting there. I'd like to thank the panelists and of course the audience for this interesting session, and see you around. Thank you.